Hello, hello. I am Kimberly Cecil Jones, and I'm filling in tonight for Aaron Viles. So, welcome to Kernels of Truth. It's brought to you by Progress Kentucky. As you well know, this week we're going to cover all of the breaking Kentucky political news stories around the 2023 statewide elections. We'll also cover Andy Barr today. Yes, that Andy Barr, who won a legislative victory fueled by personal tragedy, unfortunately. And we've got a return amazing guest, UK law professor and democracy expert, Professor Joshua Douglas, who joins Doug and Aaron a little bit later for a discussion about the state of Kentucky's democracy. And we'll wrap up with an important call to action. Okay. So, but first, let's get down to business first. First, are you ready to turn Kentucky purple? I can't hear you. Okay, I thought that was right. That you said yes, you've been ready. Okay, you've been ready. So, how do we do that? Okay, this is what we do. We saw what happened on November the 8th. The GOP rode a wave of gerrymandered districts to bolster, yeah, to bolster its supermajority even further. And if we're ever going to match up to the sensibilities of a Commonwealth who voted to uphold abortion rights and the political party that stands for abortion rights, our state needs you to be active. Yes, the general election is over with, but there's still so much more work to be done. So if you want a Commonwealth that works for all of us, right? Join Progress Kentucky. Yes, join us and support our campaign to turn the Commonwealth purple. Follow us on social media and share out our videos, posts, and podcasts with your friends and family. Spread the word that we're tired of the GOP ignoring the needs of regular folks in Kentucky, and we think our Commonwealth is worth fighting for. Most definitely it is. So now it's time to check in on our co-host and let all you know who and where you are and what does your protest sign say today. And yes, you that's looking at this or listening to this, that you made a comment in the comment section about what your protest sign says today. And we want to read what your sign says as well. So put it in the chat while we are sharing ours. So first of all, as I said before, my name is Kimberly Cecil Jones, and I'm here in the great city of Louisville in our great state of Kentucky. And yes, I'm still at work. Yeah, it's retail time. But my particular protest sign says today, let 2023 be the year of democracy. So I've got Doug with me today, as I like to affectionately call him, Dougie Fresh. What does your sign say today?
Yes, I'm Doug Price coming to you from Harrison County, Kentucky. You know, we're getting a new high school built here. Another good reason to move to Harrison County. Always got to have a plug for my county. My protest sign, I'm going to hold it up, says, why don't more people vote? We had 41.8% people vote in this last election, which means almost 52% of the people did not vote. That's just crazy. We got to work on that.
Most definitely we do. And also, uh, just a little tidbit there. Did you see how when the January 6th people were getting awarded, they all did not shake Mitch McConnell's hand? It was so good to watch and see. I loved it. I loved it, right? So let's go head on and get to the news of the week. And we're not talking about the week, WEEK. We're talking about the news of the week, WEAK. So this week's big news, of course, is that Mitch McConnell has even less power today than he had yesterday. Yes, you heard me right. I did not miss my words. As the Democrats now have a clear majority in the Senate, that Reverend Raphael Warnock won the re-election in Georgia. So happy about that because Herschel Walker just Mm, we should have just remembered him as a great football player and not this asinine type of campaign that he had. But you know what? Trump was very much to blame for that, forcing a horrible candidate in a race with this clear majority. Senate Democrats will have more ability to get things accomplished through the committees, including the judicial appointments and policy as well. But however, I do want to make this point. We will need to get through the GOP controlled House. Unfortunately, so despite more power in the Senate, we're unlikely to see very many Democratic legislative priorities moving forward. Why? In other words, Trump and McConnell news. And Doug is going to bring us a story that will allow us to understand those statements I just made a little bit better.
Thank you, Kimberly. I'm going to be putting some words in Mitch McConnell's mouth. I titled this A Milk Toast Response to More Trump Horrors. Recently, the former President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, wrote these words. So, with the revelation of massive and widespread fraud and deception and working closely with big tech companies, the DNC and the Democrat Party, do you throw the presidential election results of 2020 out and declare the rightful winner, or do you have a new election? A massive fraud of this type and magnitude allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. Our great founders did not want or would not condone false and fraudulent elections. Every president of the United States has recited the oath of office as the official start of the presidency. When it comes to Trump, the word that comes to mind related to Mitch McConnell is milquetoast. The definition is timid, meek, or unassertive. Here's an example given by Dana B. Orr. Do you really want someone who is a milquetoast, half-hearted candidate, or someone who will defend the Constitution with every fiber of her being? Senator Mitch McConnell said these words. Let me just say, anyone seeking the presidency who thinks that the Constitution could somehow be suspended or not followed, it seems to me, would have a very hard time being sworn in as President of the United States. When asked by CNN, McConnell would not say if he would support Trump if he got the Republican nomination in 2024. What I'm saying is it would be pretty hard to be sworn in as to the presidency if you're not willing to uphold the Constitution. That's what I said, and I've just said it again. It's hardly a condemnation of the ex-president's spoken words. A true patriot would have said these words, and these are the words that I'm going to put into McConnell's mouth. The oath for office presidency is found in Article 2 of the Constitution. It contains 35 words and goes as follows. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. This is what Mitch should say. Most presidents have chosen to place their hand on a Bible and repeat these words that have been repeated every time since the United States was formed. Hell, he doesn't even know how to hold a Bible. No, under no circumstances should he run for president, and if he is a president, I will not vote for him. But he cannot speak those words. He is weak. He is milquetoast. Kimberly, I'll turn it back over to you.
Is there really such a thing? Do people really eat milk toast? Is that is that something? Is that a thing?
It's probably really weak.
That's probably what McConnell eats every morning for breakfast, milk toast. And why am I not surprised? I say this every week. I am not surprised at these folks. I really am not. And Trump, oh my God, let me just pass out right now. Uh, the most fraudulent, the most There's a lot of adjectives that I would like to say, but this is sort of like a family show, I guess, so I won't say those words. But it just seems like anybody that Trump was backing had no actual chance of winning anyway. And he has no chance of winning in 2024 either. And as far as I made a little uh, I made a little note right here that, you know, he's talking about let's get rid of the Constitution. Do people really think he should be president? Doug Price?
I think the leader of Peru just tried that, and they they removed him, which is what they should do.
Yeah, in this situation, um, as far as Mitch McConnell is concerned, and that's something on another day that we can talk about, but there's a reason why no one ever gives the adequate money to Kentucky to get rid of these jokers. Seriously, there's reasoning behind that. And doesn't mean you gotta like it, but the facts are the facts. But Mitch McConnell, he never could really stand up to Trump. And I really don't think he's going to stand up to anyone at this particular point. What do you think, Doug?
Well, I think since Raphael Warnock won the Georgia Senate seat, really Mitch should just fade away to obscurity. The Democrats have a 51-49 advantage in the Senate, and that means Mitch just lost a whole lot of power. And there's a lot of people second guessing him. Apparently, he has enough votes to retain the minority leader, but the thing that will happen, in my opinion, maybe a lot of that money that comes into him, that he is from corporations, that he is able to spread out to other folks. Maybe he won't have that money now, and if he doesn't have that money, those other folks who need money for their reelections are going to have to be looking someplace else.
Exactly. And then there was a notation that you had stated about most presidents, that this comes from Liz Cheney, her tweet that you had put up for the viewers. And it said, most presidents have chosen to place their hand on a Bible and repeat these words. They have been repeated every time since the United States was formed. You know what? People like Trump and Mitch McConnell, it must be some other kind of Bible that we are not familiar with, because otherwise I think they would just blow up and explode because they're so evil. But thank you, Doug, for that great reporting. That was some really, really good information right there. Thank you. So we're going to move ahead now to the elections in 2023. And it is getting a going, y'all. Yeah, getting a going. And our great governor, Andy, has filed. But what about the rest of the ticket, y'all? The rest of the ticket, right? As we mentioned last week, actually, Colonel and State Representative Pamela Stevenson announced her intention of running for Attorney General with Dan Cameron. No, don't get that look. She's not running with Daniel Cameron. We're just saying that Daniel Cameron, the oppositional person for Kentucky, is trying to put his hat in the ring for governor. Now, these constitutional offices will be up for grabs, and that would be the Attorney General. And it's good to see such a strong candidate like Colonel Pamela Stevenson jumping in, and of course, our great governor, Andy Bashir. But it's really, really like quiet so far. It's like crickets, like just silence, So, with the filing deadline for the statewide elections, it's going to be January the 6th. What a day that's going to be. And there are a couple of things that I want to bring up about that. And one of the things is this right here. I have this timed light in my office, so I'll just kind of back up a little bit and come back. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So, uh, let's say this. Austin Horn has a great article in the Lexington Herald Leader pointing out that Matt Lehman, who ran against Tom Massey here in Kentucky, in northern Kentucky, matter of fact, is considering jumping in the race. Okay, perhaps treasurer. Who knows? Some other names that have been, just kind of floating in the atmosphere of the politicals is also the governor's right hand man, Rocky Adkins. We love him, and it seems pretty unlikely that he would jump into the AG commissioner race, which has a few Republicans, or you can say a few elephants already that are lining up. So someone has to file, and who is that going to be? And apparently, we've been hearing about Miss Kimberly Reeder. She's a tax attorney in Moorhead who has raised over, let me check my stats right here, $28,000 so far for her race for state auditor. And it was also mentioned in the article that Sierra Inlow is a name that has been floated for Commissioner of Agriculture. Inlow is a veteran of Jack Conway's gubernatorial race in which he lost against Matt Bevin. So, who's not going to be running? You may ask yourself. Well, so far we see that it's not going to be Neville Blakemore, who ran in 2015, and he was quoted saying this: "If your last name is Bashir, you can win statewide. But if you don't have that, you're probably out of luck." We shall see about that. I think it was a pretty hard race to win. And Andy won by about 5,000 and something votes to be our governor. And it took a lot of work. It was a very, very aggressive campaign. I was out there canvassing and doing phone calls, and it was like the most aggressive campaign that I've ever been affiliated with. But it was all worth it to get the governor that we got. So what are you thinking about that, Doug?
Yeah, I have some thoughts. I've looked at all of the candidates. I can give you a little more information on some of them. We talked about some who may or may not be entering the race. Let me toss a name out there. Jeff Young still has time to enter the race, and he might enter, I don't know, as a Republican or a Democrat or a Libertarian. There are 18 candidates in the race for the governor's office. 18. That's got to be some kind of record. There are 12 Republicans running, and I know that's got to be a record too. And there's still the specter of Matt Bevin entering the race. That's been rumored. And I would
What?
think,
How,
oh
how,
yeah,
how, what? You're
just think
talking
about it.
about Matt Bevin that used to be the governor that really like trashed the economy and just we're talking about two different Matt Bevins, right?
No, we're talking about the one and only. Fortunately, there's just one, I would think. And I don't have any inside information, but you'd have to think that if there are 12 Republicans in the race, there are going to be some people who are going to take away votes from other people. And does Matt Bevin have enough people who think highly enough of him to not vote for Ryan Quarles or Kelly Craft? Personally, I think the odds-on favorite right now is the Ag Commissioner Ryan Quarles. He spent the last 8 years, or actually not quite 8 years, but as Ag Commissioner being out and about, and he's fairly well known. Kelly Craft's money is going to come into play. Right now, Governor Beshear has more in his campaign coffers than all of the other candidates for all of the other executive branch elections. He has a total of $4 million on hand. I'm going to title my next comment, Rumor and Conjecture. conjecture alert. A couple years ago, it was rumored that McConnell wanted to step down after being reelected and to have Cameron appointed to replace him. The Kentucky Republican-controlled legislature passed Senate Bill 228, which would have allowed the Republican Party to nominate Cameron to replace him if McConnell retired. Supposedly, McConnell wanted Kelly Craft to be governor. It seems as if Cameron backed out of the deal and now wants to be governor, and now McConnell has another one of his acolytes running against Craft. The Attorney General's race is heating up. As Kimberly mentioned, Colonel Pam Stevenson has entered the race, and Republican Russell Coleman is also in the race. Coleman worked for Frost Brown Todd and then was appointed to federal courts. One would assume that McConnell greased the wheels on that appointment. Coleman is a former FBI agent and former senior advisor, legal counsel to McConnell, and he has almost $500,000 in his campaign account compared to $0 at this point for Stevenson. That's reported as of yesterday. And how will Colonel Stevenson fare in the general election? She will need a lot of money to combat the power and money behind Mitch McConnell. Another connection to Mitch, Scott Jennings, yet another acolyte of Mitch, apparently is involved in this race on behalf of Coleman. His firm, Run Switch, helped launch Coleman's campaign, and Coleman's campaign treasurer is Emily with Run Switch. I know that because her email address is listed as Emily@RunSwitch. So far, no Democrats have entered the race for the Ag Commissioner, Treasurer, or Secretary of State. I've heard that Michael Bowman intends to run for Treasurer again. Are we headed for a repeat of the 2019 gubernatorial election year when Andy won and all of the down ballot races were won by Republicans? Do you have any thoughts, Kimberly?
I hope not. I hope that as far as the governor's race is concerned, um, yeah, money gets a lot of things, but you know what? Hate to say it, our very good friend of Progress Kentucky, Miss Amy McGrath, had money out the yin yang. You know, it takes votes, it takes mobilization, it takes organization, and money is not always what gets it. But you know what does get to me? I heard that last night that over $90 million was spent on the campaigns combined of Herschel Walker and Senator Warnock. So that's $90 million. Don't know which one raised the most. It's really not important, but $90 million. And, you know, that seems kind of crazy, doesn't it? It seems kind of crazy, but you know what? It takes money to get people out there. But I also believe that, you know, if you are really talking to the people and you visit every pocket of this state, I believe you have a chance. When people get to know you, you have a chance. And that's where I'm gonna stay with that, Doug. That's where I'm gonna stay. But real quick, we did mention Andy Barr in the beginning, so we've got a couple of minutes to talk about this. But yeah, we definitely don't like Andy Barr, not particularly as a person, but for some of the things that he has done. But remember, we're not monsters, okay? Dougie Fresh and I, we're definitely not monsters. So he got his Carroll Act through the democratically controlled House. He did that. And Senate, demonstrating the ability of these institutions to do important bipartisan work despite Andy Barr ever. Okay, demonstrating that type of support. He did get the bill focused on researching the heart defect that tragically killed his beautiful wife, Carol. Now it just needs to be signed by the president. I couldn't imagine that this pro healthcare, pro compassion president who's lost his own wife so long ago wouldn't immediately sign the bill. What do you think about that?
Oh,
Doug, what do you think about that?
yeah. I think there's no question that he'll sign the bill. And, I feel sorry for Andy Barr. That was a horrible thing to happen. And uh, the bill, it sounds like a really nice bill. They're calling it the Carroll Act, the acronym. I don't have it right here, but I think that's nice. And hopefully it'll help other people that maybe are in the same situation, and maybe it'll help to save some lives. That's really all I can say about that.
Well, it's really nice to report because we're not against people, right? We are against what they do when they're doing wrong. But this right here is oh so right. So, we give props where props are due, right? So, but you know what? This is really what I've been waiting for, Dougie Fresh. I've been waiting for this like for days now. So right now I'm so excited that we're bringing to you Aaron and Doug's conversation with Kentucky elections expert. Yes, Professor Joshua Douglas at the University of Kentucky. For their discussion of the state of Kentucky's democracy, touching on the most recent elections, gerrymandering, and how to increase the number of voters. So, Miss Annabelle, our producer, is with us tonight. So, take it away, Annabelle.
And now, really excited to bring you our interview with Professor Josh Douglas. Professor Douglas is at the UK School of Law and is a well-acknowledged expert on democracy and election laws across the country. But we're excited to talk to him about what's going on here in Kentucky. Professor Douglas, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So yeah, we just came out of an election, right? I don't know. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on what you saw in the Kentucky midterm. Any kind of relevant stories or kind of developments that you think inform our perspective about the state of democracy in Kentucky.
Sure. So we're thinking about Kentucky specifically as opposed to the nationwide storyline, which I think is also important. But the Kentucky story of the midterms is, I think, one that we saw slightly expanded access to voting. This is the first federal election when we had 3 days of no excuse early voting, and that's great. Combined with somewhat voter apathy, at least if you look at turnout numbers. I think people expected the turnout to be higher. It wasn't as high as expected. And I think there's some things to think about and some stories to tell. I think my takeaway ultimately is that progress was good, but it's nowhere near done.
And that's, of course, these are the first elections held under these kind of new maps, right? So the census came out, the Republican GOP supermajority. Of course, you're a nonpartisan player. I want to make sure that's very clear. We are not a nonpartisan organization, but you are a nonpartisan expert. So I don't want to color your remarks with our perspective, and I know that you are kind of a bipartisan observer of this whole thing. But yeah, so what we saw is that the GOP supermajority created new maps. There were lawsuits about those maps. Ultimately, what the GOP came up with, despite being vetoed by the governor, that was what we decided our elections on for this most recent election. What's your assessment of kind of how those maps performed? What was the kind of impact of them? We'll talk. I'll respond after you answer to because we've talked about this a little bit already. But yeah, what do you think happened?
I mean, I think the math performed as people expected, which is it helped to produce a Republican further supermajority in the legislature. My cat wants to say hi. And
wonderful. We welcome animal participation.
The age of after pandemic and Zoom, where you never know what happens on these calls with people's pets and homes involved. So, the maps, I think, performed as expected. I don't think the maps are why Republicans won the legislature. I think Republicans are going to win the legislature either way. I think the size of the majority, I think, is explainable in part by the gerrymandered maps. And, it's interesting that the Democrats didn't even challenge the Senate map. And I think arguably they should have as well, under the same kinds of arguments, given that the Senate is now even more skewed heavily toward Republicans with the maps that are in place right now. I think the congressional map, with the congressional delegation going 5 Republicans and 1 Democrat, I think this probably would have happened under any map most likely. But what the map did was made it harder to have a reasonable challenger, particularly in the 6th district here in Lexington. And so, the story of gerrymandering isn't just about the results. It's also about who runs. It's about people thinking, I've got no shot at, this election, so why even bother? And so, it's a hard thing to measure, but I think the effects are clear that the legislature is definitely skewed more towards Republicans than I think they would have been under a fairer map.
And you've been quoted as saying that those maps are illegal, right? And I think there's a few different maps and there's a few different kind of arguments to be made. Your point about the Democrats not even challenging the Senate maps is interesting, because I live in Lexington and I live in the 28th district, which a lot of growth in Lexington in areas that are included in the 28th. That growth is not reflected in a district that is reflective of my views or the views of the area that has been growing in Lexington, right? So we've got, we are now in a very rural district, which of course with the 28th district now being, kind of in conversation because Ralph Alvarado is going to be moving to Tennessee. We talked about this last week, but you look at that district, and despite the fact that, a lot of growth in the areas in Lexington, that district is now, Bath County, Menifee County, Montgomery County, and Clark County. So vastly rural in terms of the overall landscape that district covers. And I think that's the model that they used, right? Was to cut out some of those, much of Lexington, added into some rural areas so they could overwhelmingly hold as many districts as possible that have some Lexington in it.
The map is a great example of what we refer to as cracking. The 2 basic ways to gerrymander are packing and cracking. Packing being you smush as many of the same voters in one district as possible, essentially give them a super majority, and then you can control all the surrounding districts. It's kind of what's happened a little bit in Louisville with some of these districts. And then cracking is you have a group that is, demographically similar and ideologically similar, and you draw a line just through them. So you crack them into various different districts. And I think Lexington is a great example of cracking that's gone on. The second largest city does not have the kind of representation one would think population-wise, because so many of the Lexington districts are split up into other more rural districts as well.
Yeah. So that is definitely something that, I, as a voter, very disappointing that, I went from Jared Carpenter's district to what is Ralph Alvarado's district, because, I would like to see my views represented in Frankfort. Thankfully, at the House level, Sherilyn Stevenson, despite being, I think, put in an unfair district at the House redistricting effort, she hung on to that seat by 35 votes. Again, just showing how hard she works and her team works. But yeah, I think the House district House maps are similarly, weighted towards supporting the GOP.
And it shows how much every vote counts, or every 35 votes counts. And there's a couple of years ago there was an election in Virginia for a state legislative seat, and as went that seat went the control of the legislature, and it came down to literally 1 vote. We had a similar thing happen. I think it was in New Hampshire this past cycle, where election came down to 1 vote, and it dictated control of, I forget, maybe in a city council, but these things, do come down to very few votes. Sometimes you never know which ones are going to be.
And obviously, that's not necessarily reflective of the kind of the ideals of democracy, right? That these maps have been drawn in such a way, but we haven't seen a lot of success legally challenging them so far. I think there's an appeal happening right now. What's your assessment of kind of where that legal process stands?
Yeah, so the Democrats challenged the state house and the congressional maps under the state constitution. And this stems from the U.S. Supreme Court saying that the federal courts are closed to claims of partisan gerrymandering. That is, a map is drawn with politics too much in mind, and that violates the U.S. Constitution. So litigants have gone to state courts using state constitutions all around the country, and they've seen some success. Pennsylvania Supreme Court, North Carolina Supreme Court, and the courts are latching on to language in the state constitutions that say that elections in the state must be free and equal or free and open. And so that's exactly what the Kentucky Democrats are arguing as well, that a map that is so skewed, is drawn with politics so much in mind, is not free and equal under the state constitution. Now, the Franklin Circuit Court Judge Wingate, issued a very thorough opinion in which is kind of really interesting. He basically said, yeah, these are terrible partisan gerrymanders, that the maps are unfair. And yet he said, however, as a trial court judge, I don't think I have the authority to rule them unlawful under the state constitution. In my view, if you're the Kentucky Democrats, it's about as good of a loss as you can get. They lost the case at the trial level because the court refused to recognize the claim under the state constitution. But Judge Wingate issued all of these findings about how the map is clearly a gerrymander, discounted the state's expert, one of the state's experts, as saying that the expert didn't use reliable methodology, credited experts, other state experts, as well as the Democrats' experts, to say that the map is unfair. And so it's really a pure legal question. I know that the Democrats have appealed to the Court of Appeals, but asked the Kentucky Supreme Court to take the case and skip the Court of Appeals stage, something that the Kentucky Supreme Court can, and my guess is probably will do. And then it'll be a pure legal question as to, whether the state constitution should be recognized as preventing gerrymandering, as giving force and scope to this free and equal clause of the state constitution. And let me just add, we talked earlier about what's one of the takeaways from the Kentucky election. One thing I didn't mention was that partisans lost in the judicial races. That is to say, the candidates who were really explicitly partisan, like Joe Fisher in Northern Kentucky, running for the Kentucky Supreme Court, lost his race. And that, I think, makes a difference in terms of how the Kentucky Supreme Court may view these kinds of issues. I think they are intertwined. That election and this gerrymandering case, I think, is intertwined.
It's really interesting. That's a good point, and we covered the judicial races in previous episodes. But adding in that kind of Amendment 2 and Amendment 1, it seems like there's Kentucky is comfortable being conservative, but they aren't necessarily looking to muddy the waters in the courts, right? You don't want partisan direction to our state constitution, whether it's Amendment 1 or Amendment 2, and they don't want to see that kind of partisan, rule of the day in the courts as well. So really interesting that you brought that up. I know, Doug, you've got some ideas about, or some questions about, the overall landscape of voting. So we'll turn to you now.
I just want a quick comment about Joe Fisher. He ran. It was supposed to be a nonpartisan race, and he ran it as a partisan, and he got beat. I wonder if he had run it as a nonpartisan, would that have made a difference?
It very well could have. And you look at the Joe Bilby, Phil Shepard race in Franklin Circuit Court as well. Joe's a former student of mine, actually, and I think a really good guy. But that race, in many ways, became partisan as well, and I think the voters, stuck with the incumbents, who they knew and felt that, had not been explicitly partisan on the court.
Okay. To get back to the other thing that Aaron just mentioned, I'm a person that really want more people to vote. And thinking about this past election, Kentucky Secretary of State Adams predicted there was going to be a 50% voter turnout, which would have been a great turnout, even though that still means 50% of the people didn't vote. It turned out we had 41.8% is the last percentage that I saw. And there are a lot of organizations, both partisan and nonpartisan, political and non-political, that try to get out the vote. They get a list from the Kentucky, I guess it's I don't know if it's the Secretary of State or voter registration. But anyway, they get a list that says, these are people who have voted in the past. They're more likely to vote. maybe vote one way or the other. But what about those people who never vote? We've got 58.2% of the vote who did not vote, which means those people, if they voted, they certainly would have swung the election one way or the other, I would think. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of inputs into what drives turnout, and turnout is notoriously difficult to predict and difficult to explain what happened. I think part of the story in Kentucky was that people didn't feel like there was a major top of the ticket race that was competitive. I think that people didn't think Charles Booker had much of a chance, and so he wasn't really driving Democratic vote. What did surprise me was that Lexington and Louisville's turnout was down, and there seemed to be a lot of motivation surrounding Amendment 2, the abortion amendment, which I think in some ways maybe suggests that it really is top of the ticket candidates who drive turnout. What I don't want people to say is that, well, we expanded early voting and it made no difference. I think that's absolutely wrong. I think imagine what the turnout would have been had we not had the convenience of 3 additional days to vote as well. To me, the number one thing we can do to reach the non-voters is to reduce our registration deadline. Kentucky has one of the worst registration deadlines in the country, 29 days before Election Day. And if you're not on the voter rolls by then, you're out of luck. And many people who are not habitual voters aren't thinking about whether they want to vote 30 days before the election. They're thinking about it the weekend before the election, or maybe the week before the election. And in states that have same-day voter registration, or a registration deadline that's only a few days before Election Day, they have higher turnout. It's almost an exact correlation. So we know this works, and they don't have fraud. We know how to make the technology work for it. So I think the low turnout in part is explained by the registration deadline. We also still require an excuse to vote by mail, to vote absentee by mail. We do have those 3 days of early voting for no excuse, and that's great. So I think it's a combination of, something that is salient at the top of the ticket and voting policies. We also have a lot of, we were talking earlier before we came on about felon reenfranchisement. There's a lot of people who have regained the right to vote but don't know it. And the state needs to do a much better job, and we as community in the community need to do a better job of educating people that they've regained their voting rights as well. So, it's got to be a multi-pronged approach. There's lots of ways to do it, but I think one of the biggest things we could do is fix the voter registration deadline. That's going to have a measurable impact on turnout, I'd say immediately.
And then, so in those states, you say there's a clear correlation between the voter registration deadlines and turnout, which totally makes sense. Because most people besides people on this podcast are not thinking about the election 30 days out, right? So I would argue that makes a lot of sense to adjust those. But what's the prospects, right? Because that's something we would either have to get the legislature to do on their own. Would it be like a constitutional amendment, or could Michael Adams as Secretary of State, does he have any bandwidth to do that, or is he going to have to be directed?
No, it's got to be a legislative fix. And part of the problem is convincing the county clerks, because the county clerks feel like they need all the time they want to manage the various process. So I think it does, in some ways it's an evidentiary hurdle, right? Proving to the county clerks that other states do this, and here's how we could do it in a faster way, right? Here's how you could streamline your process in a faster way. And also, I think the legislature needs to be explained and needs to be convinced, that it's politically good for them, right? I mean, we've had some real good success in Kentucky election voting rules in the past couple of years, in part because we've combined voter expansions with so-called security or integrity measures. And so I think we need to find a way to couple a better registration deadline with integrity measures, and also prove to the legislature that it's politically palatable and is something that they would want to, that a shorter registration deadline could actually be good for the voting system and good for them politically. Well,
count us in any conversations of where that kind of conversation about how you can advance that type of a kind of just ease of voting, more voting agenda, please count us in. I know that League of Women Voters is constantly concerned about these issues as well. And, we've had them on our show a number of times. But I do think there's a just nonpartisan approach that we should be taking. And especially right now with the Secretary of State who, ostensibly, likes to work in a bipartisan fashion to some degree, his own tagline of making it harder to cheat, easier to vote. It seems like this fits in that. I think
that's right. And then there's also a voter education aspect, on the policy issues, but also on candidates, right? I don't know if your listeners are aware of Civic Lex. It's an amazing organization that I'm on the board of here in Lexington that had a great website, lex.vote, that, for every local candidate. So you could go and figure out who the candidates running for coroner and what they wanted. And I used it because I didn't know all of these various candidates. And those sorts of things need to be really promoted more in the community. That can help the engagement process as well. People understand why it matters.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I use Civic Lex as well. Really, really useful stuff. Good information to share out. But I think that's about as much time as we can take. I know you're a busy guy, and we appreciate you sharing your expertise with us this evening. And thanks so much.
This was great. Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Douglas.
What a great interview. I'm proud of y'all.
That was fun.
Oh, yes. So much information. It'd be impossible to unpack it all. But some gems of wisdom and expertise that we can carry on, and also to understand exactly what has happened. So I appreciate you guys, and we appreciate Professor Joshua Douglas, and we hope that he'll come back on with the show, even though he is at University of Kentucky. But I'm here in Louisville. This is U of L, University of Louisville country. I'm sorry. But, we got to do our calls to action. I wish the interview was a little bit longer. I was really learning a lot, and I was taking some notes, right? So our call to action now is take action. Yeah, take some action. Why don't you please? What we're going to be doing, tell the GOP and the state Senate leaders to act on the medical marijuana. Okay, yes, 98% support legalizing medical marijuana in Kentucky. But despite the important executive order, which is essence decriminalizing medical marijuana in Kentucky, but you still need to get it legally out of state, which could be a bit challenging. So we need the state legislator to act. Yes, the legislature needs to do something about this. The news broke this week that the legislative effort will begin this session in the Senate. As a reminder, last session, the House passed a bipartisan bill, but the state Senate has been where hope goes to die traditionally in our Commonwealth. So it is critical, yes, critical, that we increase the pressure on Kentucky's GOP Senate supermajority leaders, Robert Stivers, Damon Thayer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know who they are, right? So that's where you come in. This is a call to action. This is where you come in. We've launched an online action, and so far 50 folks have taken action to send an email to their legislator, as well as the 5 GOP supermajority. Do you really want to call them leaders? But I guess, okay. So we need to top 100. So we need to flood their inboxes. So please take action right now. It's quick, it's easy. Then follow up on your action with a social media share or an email to your like-minded friends and family. Anything you can do to spread the word matters, okay? Everything matters at this point. You might feel like you're not doing enough. anything that you can do is much, much appreciated. So we are back next week, and Aaron will be back as your host. So come check out the show. Make sure you spread it out to everyone that you know as well. There was some great information given today with Aaron and Doug and Professor Douglas. So Progress Kentucky is a nonprofit organization registered with the Kentucky Secretary of State, organized as a 501c4, is affiliated with the Indivisible Project and the Commonwealth Alliance Voters Engagement, otherwise known as CAVE. Now, Progress Kentucky's goal is to educate, organize, increase voter turnout, and advance a progressive agenda through civic engagement. Production this evening was by our very own lovely and talented Miss Annabel Nagel. We love you, girl. You keep us straight. And thank you to Nate Orshan, our very own Nate Orshan. And you can find more information and listen to more of his music because he does the theme song. And you can check him out at natosongs.com. That's NATO songs.com. And of course, if you miss us, you can go back and see us on YouTube. We're on Instagram. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. Go to Progress Kentucky. You can even go to our website, progresskentucky.org. Okay. If you miss, you could also do audio podcast. Okay. There are some simple times that you can't do it, but it's available on Apple, Google, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcast. The logo and some graphic content was done by Couchfire Media. Go check them out at couchfiremedia.com. Look, you've made it over the hump. It's Wednesday. Yes, 2 more days to go in the field that I'm in. How about 8 more days to go? But till the next off day. But guess what? You've made it this far. And you know what? Do something nice for someone this week. You will be amazed at how it would make you feel. And isn't this the season to be giving, to be nice, to have kindness in our hearts? This is the season. And the reason is that we can show our love and compassion for one another. So, great night tonight. Like I said, Aaron will be back next week. Thank you to Mr. Doug Price for his also always thorough news, and to Annabelle once again, and also to you. Give yourselves a hand clap. We made it through the general election, and we've got a long way to go, but we can do it together. All right. So same bat channel, same time, and we will see you next week.